The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the vast, barren landscape of a planet that had once been full of life. The wind howled through the cracked ground, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. Far from the busy cities and the grand palaces, the last remnants of a war-torn world lay forgotten in the emptiness. In the middle of this desolate place, a figure lay motionless. Blood stained the dirt beneath her, her breathing shallow, each inhale a struggle. She was an alien princess, Lyrael, the last of a once great royal line, now abandoned and left for dead. Her once glorious armor, adorned with symbols of her kingdom, was cracked and battered, barely holding together. The silver plating was covered in dirt and blood, and her regal cloak was torn in several places. Lyrael had been betrayed. The very people who swore to protect her had turned their backs, leaving her to die on this forgotten planet. The treacherous soldiers who had once been her allies had been the ones to strike the final blow, leaving her with a wound that was deep enough to kill. But somehow she had managed to survive, if only just. She was all alone. Her mind flickered, in and out of consciousness. The sounds of distant explosions echoed in her ears, a reminder of the war she had never wanted. She had only wanted peace. But now all that was left was destruction. She felt the coldness of the ground beneath her and the emptiness of the world around her. It was as though time itself had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, the roar of a jet engine could be heard. Lyrael's head turned slightly, her eyes struggling to focus on the sky above. It was not an enemy ship. It was too loud, too heavy. She didn't have the strength to move, but she knew she had to try. Her hand reached out, fingers trembling, grasping at the dirt as if she could pull herself away from the inevitable. But she couldn't. Her vision blurred once more, and the weight of exhaustion pulled her into darkness. A few hours later, a new sound broke through the stillness. Footsteps, strong, steady, and purposeful. A human soldier, moving with precision through the harsh landscape, appeared in Lyrael's fading vision. He was dressed in dark, protective armor, with a rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was hard, but his eyes, those eyes, were full of determination. He was not an enemy. She could feel it despite her fading strength. His presence felt different. It was a strange thing to feel when all she had known was betrayal. The soldier paused for a moment when he saw her. His eyes swept over her wounded form, taking in the bloodied armor and the deep cuts along her arms. The princess was beautiful, even in her state of near death. Her skin was pale but flawless, and her golden hair shimmered faintly in the dim light of the dying day. For a moment he hesitated. He had not been trained to deal with aliens, let alone royalty, but there was something in her eyes that pulled at him, something that made him act on instinct rather than protocol. He knelt beside her, his gloved hand reaching for the comlink on his suit. "This is Sergeant Jack Donovan. I found someone. It's an alien. She's alive but badly wounded." He looked around, assessing the situation. There were no other signs of life, no other soldiers, no enemy forces. It was just him and her, stranded in this barren place. Jack's heart raced, but he kept his cool. He knew what he had to do. The mission was important, but so was saving a life. He had been trained to survive, to fight, and to save lives when possible. And this was a chance to do something that mattered. He gently lifted her up, cradling her in his arms as best as he could, his movements careful to avoid causing more harm. He wasn't sure if she would wake up, but he had to try. His heart skipped a beat when he realized how light she was, how fragile she seemed. "Hold on," he muttered under his breath, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I'm not leaving you here." With no other option, Jack carried the princess across the harsh terrain, each step a reminder that he was alone with someone who was not just an enemy, but something much more. The wind began to pick up, but Jack's resolve did not falter. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why was she here? And why had she been abandoned? But there was no time for answers now, only action. As Jack made his way back to his camp, the princess's body became heavier in his arms. But Jack's determination never wavered. He had seen death before, too many times, but something about this moment felt different. He had the power to save this life, and he would not let it slip away. When they finally reached the camp, Jack quickly set the princess down on the medical bed. He had no idea what kind of injuries she had sustained, but he was determined to do everything he could to help her. His fellow soldiers watched from a distance, their eyes wide with curiosity and uncertainty. They had never seen an alien before, let alone one that looked so human. But Jack didn't care about their questions. He focused on the task at hand. In the quiet of the night, as Jack worked tirelessly to treat Lirael's wounds, he couldn't help but wonder about her. She had been left behind, abandoned by her own people. Why? And what had caused such a cruel betrayal? But Jack knew he didn't have the answers yet. The only thing he knew for sure was that, for now, he had to save her. There was no going back, no retreating from this. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. As the hours passed, Lirael's breathing became steadier. Jack continued to work, his hands moving with precision. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, and maybe, just maybe, he had just made the first step toward something much bigger than either of them could ever imagine. The sun had long set, leaving the camp bathed in the soft glow of artificial lights. The air was cool, and the distant hum of equipment filled the otherwise quiet night. Inside the small medical tent, Lirael lay on a makeshift cot, unconscious and still. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only sign that she was alive. Jack sat beside her, his face lit by the dim light from his small medical kit. He was trying his best to clean her wounds, but the alien anatomy was strange to him. Her blood, unlike human blood, had an odd greenish tint. He had never encountered anything like it before, but he didn't have the luxury of time to figure it all out. He had to keep her alive, and that was all that mattered. As he carefully dressed her wounds, Jack thought about the situation. He had seen his fair share of battlefield injuries, but this was different. This was not just some soldier, this was a princess. And yet, here she was, lying in front of him, vulnerable and helpless. Her armor was a symbol of strength, yet now it lay torn and broken. Jack's mind raced. How had this happened? Why had she been abandoned? There were too many questions and no answers. But he knew one thing for sure. He had to keep her safe. He glanced over at his team who were gathered, outside the tent, talking in hushed tones. They were uneasy, unsure of how to react. A human soldier rescuing an alien princess was not something any of them had been trained for. But Jack had a feeling, one that told him this moment would change everything. The future of their mission, and perhaps even the future of the war, depended on what happened next. As the hours passed, Jack kept watch over Lirael, refusing to leave her side. He didn't trust anyone else to handle her, not with so many unknowns. His team had been sent to this planet for reconnaissance, not rescue. They were supposed to gather information and leave. But now, with the princess in their care, their mission had become something far more complicated. Suddenly, a soft groan escaped from Lirael's lips. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he stood up quickly, moving closer to her. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked confused, as if she didn't quite understand where she was. "Where am I?" Her voice was weak, but there was strength in it, like a queen trying to reclaim her throne even in the face of defeat. Jack hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of how to explain. "You're safe," he said simply, trying to keep his tone calm. "You were hurt. I found you." Lyriel blinked, her eyes focusing on him. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body, causing her to wince. Jack quickly stepped forward, gently placing a hand on her shoulder to help her back down. "Easy," he said softly. "You need to rest." For a moment, there was silence. Between them, the only sound being the steady hum of the medical equipment. Lyriel looked up at him, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice stronger now but still carrying the weight of her injury. Jack was taken aback by the question. It wasn't one he had expected. He had only acted on instinct to help someone in need. But he knew the answer was more complicated than that. "You were in danger," he said simply. "I couldn't leave you there." For a long moment, Lyriel studied him, as if weighing his words. Her sharp alien eyes seemed to pierce through him, and for the first time, Jack felt as though he were the one being judged. "I am Lyriel, daughter of King Varath, ruler of the Valeris people," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride, though it was tinged with bitterness. "You should not have interfered. My people will come for me." Jack didn't respond right away. He could see the anger and pride in her face, but he could also sense the fear hiding behind it. She wasn't just the princess of an alien race. She was a survivor, and her world had just been shattered. He sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I don't know anything about your people," Jack admitted. "But I do know that you're alive, and right now that's all that matters." Lyriel looked at him for a long time, her gaze intense. She seemed to be searching for something in his expression. Something that would explain why a human soldier would risk his life for an enemy princess. But there were no easy answers. "You are human," she said quietly. "And yet, you have shown kindness. I do not understand." Jack didn't have an answer to that. He could only shrug. "Sometimes we do things because they're the right thing to do," he said. As the night stretched on, Lyriel slowly began to regain her strength. Her breathing became more regular, and the color returned to her face. Jack continued to watch over her, doing his best to keep her comfortable. His mind was still racing with questions, but he couldn't afford to lose focus now. Outside the tent, his team was getting restless. They were ready to move out, to continue their mission. But Jack couldn't just abandon her. Not now. Not when. She was this close to death. At dawn, Lyriel was strong enough to sit up. She still winced with pain, but she was more alert now. She looked at Jack, who had been by her side all night, and for the first time, she saw him not as an enemy, but as something else, a human who had chosen to help her despite the risks. "You could leave me," she said, her voice softer now. "You could run from this? From me?" Jack shook his head. "I don't leave people behind." There was a moment of silence between them, and Lyriel found herself reflecting on her past. The betrayal, the loss, the empty palace. She had never expected to be in this position, to rely on a human soldier to save her life. But somehow in this strange foreign camp, surrounded by nothing but the harsh winds and the uncertain future, Jack Donovan had done the impossible. He had saved her. She didn't know what to say to him, or if she even should. But for the first time, she felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps the universe wasn't as cruel as she had believed. Maybe there was a chance, after all. The days that followed felt like a blur of strange new feelings and uneasy silences. The camp had become a makeshift hospital, with Lyriel slowly recovering under Jack's careful watch. She was no longer unconscious, but her body was still fragile, healing from the wounds she had suffered. The princess spent much of her time resting, her mind working through the confusion of what had happened to her. Every so often, Her thoughts would drift to her home, Valorous, the great city that had once been full of life and power. But now, it was just a memory. Her kingdom had crumbled, and the people who had once pledged their loyalty had turned on her. Jack watched her closely. He noticed how she would stare into the distance, lost in thought. It was clear that she was struggling, not just with her physical recovery, but with the emotional scars left by her betrayal. Her strength, once unshakable, had been shattered. He didn't know how to help her with that. He wasn't a therapist or a leader. He was just a soldier doing his job. But over time, he found himself feeling something more for her, something that went beyond his duty as a rescuer. There was something about her, something in the way she carried herself even in her weakest moments, that drew him in. She wasn't just a princess. She was a warrior at heart, determined to survive no matter the odds, and yet despite their growing connection, a wall remained between them. Trust didn't come easily, especially not after the kind of betrayal she had experienced. She had lived her life among those who had abandoned her, and Jack knew it would take time to break through that wall. The mornings were the hardest. Jack would wake early to check on Lirael before the others stirred. The first few days had been rough. She had been delirious with pain, her mind clouded with fever, but now she was more alert. Still, every time Jack entered the tent, her eyes would narrow, as if expecting him to reveal some hidden agenda, some ulterior motive. "I don't trust you," she told him one morning as he approached her cot, her voice flat. Jack wasn't surprised. It wasn't the first time she had said it, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. The words stung, but he didn't let it show. He had expected as much. "I know," he said, setting down a tray of food beside her. "And I don't. Expect you to? Not yet." She studied him carefully, her sharp alien eyes flicking over him, as if searching for the truth behind his words. "I don't trust anyone," Lirael continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not anymore. My own people betrayed me, Jack. I was left to die. So don't think that just because you helped me, I owe you anything." The coldness in her words stung again, but Jack couldn't help but understand where they were coming from. Betrayal ran deep in her veins, and no amount of kindness or good intentions could erase the scars left by her own people. "I didn't help you because I expect anything in return," Jack said, keeping his voice calm. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. And I'll continue to help you because you deserve that." Lirael glanced away, looking out at the camp. The soldiers were busy with their tasks, preparing for the next stage of their mission. She seemed to lose herself in their movements for a moment before her eyes returned to Jack. "You don't understand," she said softly. "You're just a soldier. You don't know what it's like to be a ruler, to have people depend on you, to watch everything you've worked for crumble." Jack nodded slowly. He didn't understand what it was like to be a ruler, but he understood loss. He had seen soldiers and civilians alike lose everything in the war. He had seen families torn apart, homes burned to the ground, and lives destroyed by forces beyond their control. "I've seen it before," Jack said quietly. "But not like you have, and I don't know what it's like to be a ruler. But I do know what it's like to feel like you've lost everything." The silence between them was heavy. Lirael didn't speak right away, her gaze distant as if contemplating his words. Jack sat beside her, waiting for her to respond, knowing she needed space. She had been through more than he could imagine, and she wasn't ready to share it all yet. Days passed, and the tension between them remained, though it had started to shift. Lirael's wounds were healing, and with each passing day she grew, stronger. But as her body recovered, her mind seemed to wrestle with something more. She would often catch Jack watching her, his eyes not just focused on her wounds, but on her, as if he were studying her in a way that made her uncomfortable. She couldn't understand why he seemed so determined to help her. He had no reason to. He wasn't looking for fame or glory. He wasn't asking for anything, and that made her question him even more. No one had ever shown such selfless concern for her, not even her closest advisors. One evening, after the camp had settled into quiet, Lyrael spoke again, her voice soft but filled with something Jack couldn't quite read. "Why do you help me?" she asked, her eyes meeting his in the dim light of the campfire. "Why not leave me here like everyone else did? You have no reason to care." Jack looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before he answered. "I told you before," he said slowly. "I didn't help you because I expect anything. I helped you because I believe you deserve to live. You're more than just a princess. You're a person, and no one deserves to be left behind." Lyrael was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the fire, her mind racing. She had never heard anyone speak to her this way, with such sincerity. It made her feel something deep within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But hope was dangerous. She had learned that the hard way. She couldn't afford to trust him. Not yet. Not completely. "I don't know if I can trust." "You?" she said finally, her voice low but steady. Jack's eyes softened. "I understand, but you can trust me with one thing. I'm not leaving you." For the first time since he had found her, Lyrael allowed herself to believe him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more than just survival. But it would take time and trust, and that was something neither of them could rush. The days grew colder as the tension between Jack and Lyrael began to settle into an uneasy peace. Jack had done everything he could to help her recover, tending to her wounds, providing food and medicine, and offering a listening ear when she was ready to speak. Despite their differences, they had started to find a rhythm in the camp. But in the back of Jack's mind, there was always the worry that the peaceful moments would end too soon. He knew they were not truly safe. The alien forces, believing Lyrael to be dead, would soon learn that she was alive, and when they did, they would come for her. Jack had tried to prepare his team for the possibility of an attack, but the reality was more terrifying than anyone had anticipated. The planet was isolated, and the only thing that stood between them and the approaching enemy forces was a few thin layers of camouflage and a few soldiers who had only just begun to adapt to their new circumstances. One evening, as Jack stood, watched near the edge of the camp, scanning the horizon through binoculars, he saw something that made his heart race. Movement, a dark shape in the distance, barely visible against the backdrop of the storm clouds that were gathering on the horizon. He quickly lowered the binoculars and turned to his team. "We've got company," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Get ready." The soldiers moved quickly, their training kicking in as they prepared for the worst. Jack's heart beat faster, but he forced himself to remain focused. Lyrael was still recovering, and she couldn't fight yet. She had to be protected at all costs. Inside the medical tent, Lyrael was resting, her eyes closed. She had not yet fully regained her strength, but she could feel the change in the air. The tension was palpable, the way it always was before a storm. She could sense Jack's unease, and she knew something was coming. When Jack entered the tent, Lyrael didn't need him to say anything. She had grown attuned to his body language, the subtle shifts in his posture that signaled when danger was near. "Are we under attack?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. Jack nodded. "They've found us." For a moment, Lyrael felt a wave of fear. She had no desire to be captured again. The thought of being returned to her enemies, those who had once sworn loyalty to her, was enough to make her stomach turn. But then she remembered something Jack had told her. "You're not alone anymore," he had said, and she believed him. Lyrael took a deep breath, pushing past the fear. She was not the weak, helpless princess she had been when Jack had first found her. She had the strength of her people in her blood, and she would not allow herself to be taken again. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice now filled with resolve. "We'll move out at first light," Jack replied. "We've got a small hideout nearby, a place we can use until we figure out our next move." The night passed with little rest. Jack kept watch, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of the enemy. But the night was eerily quiet, as if the storm itself was holding its breath. When dawn finally broke, Lyriel was already awake. She was sitting up on her cot, her eyes steady and clear. Jack noticed the change in her. Her posture was straighter, her expression more determined. She was ready. "You look ready," Jack said as he packed up his gear, preparing for their departure. "I am," Lyriel replied, her voice firm. "Let's go." The camp was quickly packed up and the team moved out in silence. Jack led the way, keeping an eye on the terrain and the surroundings. The forest around them was thick, with tall trees that made it difficult to see far ahead. The ground was muddy from the rain, and every step seemed to echo in the silence. As they moved deeper into the forest, Lyriel stayed close to Jack. Her pace was steady, though she still looked tired. Jack kept a protective eye on her, knowing she was not fully recovered, but doing his best to keep the pressure off her. "We should be safe for now," Jack said after several hours of walking, his voice low. "But we can't stop for long." "They're not far behind." Lyriel nodded, but her mind was racing. She knew what Jack was saying was true. They couldn't afford to stop. Not now. The enemy was closing in, and every moment they spent in the open was one closer to being caught. As they pushed forward, Lyriel's mind turned back to her people. What would become of them? Would they ever understand why she had been forced to leave? Would they ever realize that the war they fought was not what they had been led to believe? She had been raised to believe that her people were the strongest, the most powerful race in the galaxy. But now everything she had known seemed like a lie. The truth was more complicated. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was beginning to see Jack's people, the humans, in a different light. They weren't the enemy. Not all of them, at least. As the hours passed, the group made their way through the thick forest, moving steadily toward their hideout. But just as they were about to reach the clearing that would lead them to safety, they heard a sound, a rustling in the underbrush, followed by the unmistakable hum of alien technology. "They're here," Jack muttered under his breath. Without warning, a group of heavily armed soldiers emerged from the trees, their weapons raised. They were wearing the distinctive armor of Valeris, Lyriel's people. The sight of them was enough to make her freeze, her heart racing. But before Lyriel could react, Jack stepped forward, his rifle raised. His voice was calm but firm. "Stay back," he warned, his eyes locked on the soldiers. "You're not taking her." The soldiers hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. They had been sent to find Lyriel, but now they were faced with a human soldier standing in their way. The standoff was tense, the air thick with uncertainty. "We've been sent to bring her back," one of the soldiers finally said, his voice cold. "I'm not letting that happen," Jack replied, his grip tightening on his rifle. "You'll have to go through me first." The air was thick with tension, the kind that hung between two forces on the brink of conflict. Jack's eyes never left the soldiers standing in front of him. They were members of Lyriel's royal guard, dressed in the same dark armor she had. Once worn, the insignia of her kingdom still faintly visible. They were trained to be powerful, ruthless, and loyal, but now they seemed uncertain. The soldiers stood in a line, their weapons raised but their bodies tense, unsure whether to attack or retreat. The one who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his eyes locked on Jack. "You don't understand," the soldier said coldly. "We've been ordered to bring the princess back, alive. She must face justice for what she's done." Jack shook his head. "You don't understand. Lyriel isn't your prisoner. She's been betrayed by her own people. I'm not letting her go." The soldier's face twisted with anger. "You don't get to decide that, human. Step aside." But Jack wasn't moving. His hand was steady on his rifle, his eyes never leaving the soldiers. He wasn't afraid. He had seen enough. Battle to know that fear was a weakness that could get you killed. But what he felt now wasn't fear. It was the cold, focused determination to protect someone who, for the first time in a long while, had shown him a reason to fight. Lyrael was silent behind him, but he could feel her presence. She was tense, waiting for something to happen. The weight of the situation was heavy on her shoulders, and Jack knew she had to make a choice. "Lyrael," he said, his voice low. "We don't have to fight, but if it comes down to it, I won't let them take you. Not again." For a moment, Lyrael didn't respond. She stood still, her mind racing, her heart beating in a rhythm that matched the tension in the air. She had spent so long running, fighting for survival, and now she was faced with a choice: stay hidden and let Jack handle this, or stand up and face her people, the ones who had betrayed her. She took a step forward, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable strength. "I'm not going back with you." The soldiers froze. One of them glanced at the leader as if expecting him to order the attack, but the leader hesitated. Lyrael was the princess, and her word had always been law. But now, she was not just the princess of Valoris. She was a woman who had been abandoned by her people, who had seen the true face of the war they fought. She wasn't the leader they remembered. "You've been betrayed," Jack said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "You don't owe them anything." Lyrael's gaze never left the soldiers, her eyes hard with defiance. "I will not be a pawn in this war any longer." The leader of the soldiers looked at Lyrael, his expression unreadable. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the forest around them. Then, with a sharp gesture, he lowered his weapon, signaling to the others to do the same. "You are making a mistake," the soldier said, his voice strained. "The Valoris Royal Council will never forgive you for this." Lyrael didn't flinch. "Then I will face that when the time comes, but not today." The soldiers exchanged looks, clearly unsure of what to do. They had been ordered to bring her back, but they couldn't fight their own princess, not without a clear reason. Finally, the leader turned his back on her, nodding to his team. "We will report this to the council," he said, his tone cold. "But for now, consider yourself free, for as long as you can run." Without another word, the soldiers retreated into the trees, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Jack lowered his rifle, but he didn't relax. Not yet. Lyrael watched them go, her heart still pounding in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. She had made a choice, and now there was no turning back. Jack took a deep breath, letting the tension melt from his shoulders. He turned to face Lyrael, his expression softening. "You did good," he said quietly. But Lyrael didn't respond. She was looking in the direction the soldiers had gone, her mind racing. She was free, yes, but she had no idea what would come next. The war was far from over, and the decisions she had made had consequences. What if the council decided to come after her with full force? What if they sent more soldiers, more powerful than the ones she had just faced? "We need to move," she said, her voice low but steady. "We can't stay here for long." Jack nodded. "Agreed. Let's get to the hideout. We'll figure it out from there." As they began to move again, Jack stayed close to Lyrael, his mind spinning with the weight of what had just happened. For the first time since he had met her, Jack wasn't sure what to expect. The path ahead was unclear, and there were so many unknowns. But one thing was certain: he would stay by her side. He had already made that promise, and he wasn't about to break it. The trek through the dense forest was long, but Jack and Lyrael pushed on. They moved quietly, staying in the shadows, doing everything they could to avoid detection. Lyrael was still recovering, But she was stronger now, more determined than ever to survive. Her thoughts kept drifting back to her kingdom, to her people, and to the future that seemed so uncertain. They reached the hideout by dusk, a small cave tucked away in the hills, hidden by thick trees and underbrush. It was a safe place, one that Jack had used in the past during recon missions. He knew it would keep them hidden, at least for a little while. As they settled in for the night, Lyriel couldn't help but think of what Jack had said. She was free. Now. But at what cost? Her people, the ones who had once called her their queen, were gone. And she was alone, in a world that no longer seemed to make sense. But as she sat beside the fire, her eyes catching the flicker of the flames, she realized something important. She wasn't alone anymore. Jack was with her, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to change everything. The days following their escape from the soldiers were tense, yet strangely calm. In the safety of the cave, Jack and Lyriel had time to reflect on what had happened and what would come next. The fear of being hunted by her people still lingered in the back of Lyriel's mind, but she had learned to push it aside. For now, they were safe. Jack spent his time keeping watch, ensuring that no one found their hideout. Lyriel, on the other hand, spent her days reflecting on her past, the life she had left behind, and the uncertain future she now faced. She had always been raised to be a ruler, to lead her people into victory, but now she found herself questioning everything she had been taught. As the days passed, Lyriel grew stronger. Her wounds had healed, and her mind began to clear. But it wasn't just her physical recovery that changed. She began to see things differently. Jack's actions, his willingness to protect her despite the danger, had begun to challenge everything she thought she knew about the world. She had expected him to be like the others, to see her as just a means to an end. But Jack wasn't like that. He had saved her life without asking for anything in return. And slowly, she began to realize that his actions weren't just those of a soldier following orders. They were the actions of someone who truly cared about her well-being. One morning, as they sat by the fire, the air still crisp from the night, Lyriel turned to Jack, her expression more serious than it had been before. "Jack," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, about my people, my kingdom." Jack glanced over at her, sensing the shift in her tone. "I know it's been a lot to take in," he said quietly, his eyes reflecting the concern he felt. "You've been through more than anyone should ever have to go through." Lyriel nodded slowly. "I've spent my life preparing for the throne. I was told that I was meant to lead, to guide my people to greatness. But now, all of that seems so far away. I was betrayed by the very people I was supposed to protect." There was a sadness in her eyes that Jack couldn't ignore. She had been left to die, abandoned by those she had trusted. It wasn't just a physical wound. It was a deep emotional scar. Jack couldn't imagine what it would be like to have everything he had worked for, everything he believed in, ripped away so suddenly. "You're not alone anymore," Jack said, his voice firm. "You have a chance to make a new life, a new path. It doesn't have to be about what your people wanted for you. It can be about what you want." Lyriel's gaze softened as she looked at him. "But what if my people don't want me? What if they come for me, and I have to face them? What if they want me to answer for what's happened?" Jack stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You can't control what they do, but you can control what you do. You don't have to go back to them if you don't want to. You don't have to follow their rules." For the first time, Lyriel allowed herself to believe that Jack might be right. For so long, she had been tied to the expectations of others. She had lived in the shadow of her people's demands, always trying to please them, to live up to their expectations. But now, she realized, she had the freedom to choose her own path. She wasn't bound to the throne. She wasn't bound to the war. "I don't know what the future holds," Lirael said, her voice thoughtful. "But I do know that I want to find my own way forward, not the way others want for me." "My way." Jack smiled, a small but genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all any of us can do. Choose our own path." Over the next few days, Lirael began to train again, not with the goal of reclaiming her throne, but with the goal of reclaiming herself. She had always been a skilled fighter, her agility and strength honed through years of training. But now, her training was different. It wasn't about being a ruler, it was about being a survivor. Jack helped her with her training, offering advice when needed, but always giving her the space she needed to grow. He didn't try to push her into anything. He simply let her take the lead. And in that, Lirael found a sense of freedom she had never known before. But as Lirael grew stronger, so did the danger. The soldiers who had once sought her out were still searching for her, and the Royal Council would not rest until they had her back. Jack knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. One afternoon, as they were preparing to move to a new location, Jack turned to Lirael, his expression serious. "We need to make a decision. We can't keep running. Eventually they'll catch up with us." Lirael's face was calm, but there was a determination in her eyes. "I know, and I'm ready. It's time for me to face them, to stop running from what I am." Jack's heart raced. He had known this moment would come. Lirael had been through so much, but this was different. She was no longer the princess of Valeris, trying to uphold the expectations of a broken kingdom. She was someone who had survived, someone who had found her own strength. "We'll face them together," Jack said, his voice filled with unwavering support. Lirael smiled, the first true smile Jack had seen from her in days. It was a smile that wasn't just born from relief, but from the strength of someone who had found a new purpose. "We will," she said, "but on my terms, not theirs." As they prepared for the next step of their journey, Lirael knew that there was no going back. The world she had known was gone, but that didn't mean she had to be lost. She had a new path to follow, and with Jack by her side, she knew she wasn't walking it alone.